Welcome back. Public sector unions affiliated to SAFTU and SAFTU have rejected the 4.7% wage increase announced by Minister for Public Service and Administration, Noxolo Kivet. The wage hike, expected to kick in on the 1st of April, forms part of the two-year public sector wage agreement signed in 2023, guaranteeing an inflation-linked increase in the 2024-2025 financial year. At the time of signing, SAFTU unions, including some from SAFTU, refused to sign the deal, accusing government of undermining collective bargaining and unilaterally forcing a below-inflation increment on them. The labour unions, including police union POPCRU, now say they will consult their members to seek a new mandate ahead of a fresh round of talks for the coming year. The union has threatened to once again mobilise and march against the government if there's no agreement.
Some labour unions in the public service have described as an insult the 2024 4.7% wage increase, accusing government of continuing to undermine the plight of workers. The South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU, is amongst those that took to the streets last year and refused to sign the two-year agreement, which they say did little to increase the workers' buying power.
The South African Federation of Trade Unions has rejected this agreement when it was even struck in 2023, because as a multi-term agreement, we argued at the time that the first leg of it was actually below inflation. What they have done then to try to mislead the workers was to try to incorporate the old cash gratuity part as part of the increase, which actually would have led to a misrepresentation of the actual increase of the wages of workers in the public service.
Police are classified as essential workers and are not allowed to go on strike, but the threats of a strike action could see some disruptions. The Police and Civil Rights Union POPCRU also refused to sign the multi-year wage agreement last year and say they will now get a mandate from their members on a way forward.
Public servants have been worse off since 2017, when the last agreement, which was talking to their salary increment and their pension fund, and then it was implemented. From that up to now, there's no any salary increment which is above inflation. So we're saying we reject this. This is an insult to the working class, who have come out and support service delivery for government during the time of COVID and also during the time of difficulties. Now we're expecting police and traffic officials to be on the road working for festive season. But immediately when they're supposed to get what is due to them, the employer is just pointing a finger and say middle finger to say, I'm giving you less than inflation.
The Public Servants Association, PSA, on the other hand, formed part of those that signed for the two-year wage agreement. The union has cautioned against what it calls the undermining of collective bargaining by government, saying they will need to strategize going forward and approach talks with caution to ensure the best wage deal for their members.
A lot has to be done in the years coming forward, next year especially. As I said, the increase is based on the projected inflation rate. And if the inflation rate does hover above 4.7, we'll be certainly demanding a salary increase that will make up the deficit for this year and obviously what we're going to negotiate for next year. We're optimistic that government will come to the party as well, will come to the table and say that public servants deserve a salary increase that will meet their financial needs.
The fresh round of talks at the Public Service Bargaining Council is expected to start in September 2024, with the workers hoping to find joy in the new administration that will be formed post the general elections. SABC News in Johannesburg.
We are now joined by Trevor Shaku, the spokesperson for the South African Federation of Trade Unions, and he joins us via our video link. Trevor, thank you so much for your time this evening. Let's start off here. I mean, you have rejected this 4.7 wage increment, or this offer from government. Why have you rejected it?
We've rejected the offer because, in our view, this amounted to a below inflation increase. And we rejected it at the time when the negotiations took place and it was put on the table in 2023. But what had happened, of course, is that the union's majority in the Public Service Coordinating Bargaining Council decided to sign it. We registered our opposition at the time. We continue to register our opposition even to this day, because in our view, workers have lost a lot of money, both in pensions, but also in their buying power in relation to the consumer price index. Because if you factor in 2020, where the government reneged out of the last leg of collective agreement of 2018 and did not pay workers' wages, it means that workers' wages at the time did not have any increase. They did not grow. In 2021, 2022, there was a little bit of growth, but this growth was only limited to improving the buying power through a cash gratuity. But the cash gratuity was recycled over a 2-year cycle, 2022, 2023, and 2023, 2024. But it did not amount to any new increase insofar as the cost of living for the 2 years which preceded this year were concerned. So in our view, this is a problem because it means that the workers' wages have been diminishing in terms of their buying power. And as a result, workers would not be able to buy the wages, the food basket, or rather the grocery basket, which they were able to buy over a period of years. But the second thing here is that when we rejected this increase last year, we cautioned that if next year the inflation rate goes beyond 4.7, this will again represent a diminution in the buying power of those wages. And we have seen, of course, others argue that the projected average inflation for this year might be 4.5, which in that case would mean that the buying power of workers' wage would have increased in real terms with 0.2%. But if we look at the CPI for February 2024, which rose to 5.6, it means that we might actually end up with a high spike of inflation, and that spike in inflation might actually mean that the average is moved from 4.5% to a higher rate, in which case it would lead to, again, a below inflation increase in that context.
What are your demands to government, since you have rejected this 4.7%, saying that is not an inflation-related increment?
So when we went into negotiations last year, we put on the table 10%. The reason we put 10% was to recoup the losses which workers would have incurred since 2020, 2021 financial years. Because if you look at the costs which would have been incurred in real terms to workers' wages, in our view, would have been only recouped them if we were able to factor in a 10% wage increment, which in our view would have catered for a CPI of a year 2023, 2024, and also catered for a CPI linked wage increase for the 2024-2025. And the remaining percentages which would have added to make 10%, in our view, would have actually allowed workers to recoup what they've lost in the past years. If you recall, we lost, for instance, the inflation rate in 2020, 2021 would have averaged around 3-4%. And when we moved into 2021, 2022, we had an inflation rate that went to 4.6. Now, if you move from there and factor in 2022, 2023, inflation rate went up to as high as 6.9%. Now, this is at the time when wages were only growing by 1.5% or 3% if we look at what happened in 2022. So in our view, the 10% would have actually catered for the losses that workers would have incurred to their real wages in the period that preceded 2020-2021 financial years.
And if government does not adhere to these demands that you've put on the table, I mean, what is the way forward for workers, and what is the way forward for the union?
Look, as the Federation, we've advised the public service unions that they've got to coordinate properly. And the unfortunate part is that last year, some unions left the agreed position from the Labour caucus of the Public Service Coordinating Bargaining Council and signed the deal which eventually sealed the multi-term agreement, which we are seeing its last leg implemented on the 1st of April 2024. So if these unions continue to be as divided, in our view, there's nothing we're going to be able to gain out of this. But we've got to learn from this weakness and ensure that when we go for negotiations for the 2025-2026 and 2026-2027, say for instance, it would be a multi-term agreement, we've got to go into those negotiations well organized and having a common position. We had a common position. The unfortunate part is that others listened to Treasury when it said that government has no money. And we insisted that government has money, and therefore the collective position we had established before ought to be maintained. The only weapon for workers to be able to wage a battle that will see them win concrete gains insofar as inflation-related wage increases are concerned would be the unity.
Trevor, thank you so much for your time. That is Trevor Shaku. He is the spokesperson for the South African Federation of Trade Unions, talking there about that increment and that offer from government of 4.7%. Of course, as unions, they have rejected this outright.